Hey guys, today we're going to talk about ordering and comparing rational numbers. Vocab for this video will be that we need to know that this is the less than sign and this is the greater than sign. And we've already compared and ordered integers. Now we're going to do the same with positive and negative fractions and decimals. So we're going to start off with two decimals. We have negative 25 hundredths and negative 1 5/10. So I've provided a number line to show you where these numbers would lie in relation to one another and to the other whole numbers that are on the number line. And my number line this time is broken into fourths, so 1, 2, 3 fourths. So each of these hash marks is going to represent 25 hundredths. So this would be 25 hundredths, this would be 50 hundredths, this would be 75 hundredths, going down to 1. And then on the other side, this would be negative 25 hundredths, negative 50 hundredths, negative 75 hundredths, and then negative 1. So if we're going to plot negative 25 hundredths on the number line, that's going to go right there. And then if we're going to plot negative 1 5/10 on the number line, well, we're going to need something that's a little further down on the number line than negative 1. Okay, so negative 1 is here. Now I know we might be consider going over here, but we need something more than negative 1. And since the negative integers increase in number size going to the left, we need to make sure that we plot that appropriately, and that's going to be midway between 1 and 2. And so in looking at these, negative 1, negative 2. So when we look at these, we can see that negative 25 is closer to the right-hand side, closer to the positive integers. So negative 0.25 hundredths is going to be the larger value in that case. When we have fractions, in this case we have negative 2 1/10, and we're comparing that to negative 1 1/5. What I like to do is make them decimals. And in this case, I've made them improper fractions. So when we're making improper fractions out of these negative fractions, we're going to ignore the negative sign right now. And we're just going to deal with 10 times 2, which is 20, plus 1 is 21. And so we have 21 over 10, and then you just attach that negative sign. Then when we divide, it's going to be 21 goes inside here. Again, we're going to ignore the negative sign just for right now. And then 10 goes on the outside. So 10 goes into 21 two times. 2 times 10 is 20. We subtract and we get 1. We bring down a 0. 10 goes into 10 one time. 1 times 10 is 10, and we subtract and we get 0. So our decimal version of 2 1/10 is 2.1, and we're going to attach our negative to that. So that's negative 2.1. And then for negative 1 1/5, 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6, so we have 6 over 5. We're going to attach our negative to it, and then when we divide, we're going to put 6 inside, 5 on the outside. 5 goes into 6 one time. 1 times 5 is 5. We subtract 6 minus 5 and get 1, bring down the 0. 5 goes into 10 two times. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. So negative 1 1/5 as a decimal is going to be negative 1.2. So if we look down at our number line down here, unlike the last time I had that one broken into fourths, this one's broken into fifths. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. And so these little slash marks here would be going up by increments of 2/10. So this would be 2/10, 4/10, 6/10, 8/10, and then 1 whole. And then on the other side, negative 2/10, negative 4/10, negative 6/10, negative 8/10, and then again 1 whole. So our first number, which is negative 2.1, we have to come all the way down here to negative 2. And so since this hash mark here is going to be negative 2 2/10, okay, and we're looking for negative 2 1/10, that's going to be halfway in between whole number negative 2 and, the integer of negative 2 and then negative 2 2/10. So our next number, which is negative 1.2, or negative 1 2/10. Okay, we're going to go down to negative 1 and then find where 2/10 would be, which is right there. And then when they're plotted on the number line, we can see that negative 1 1/5 is a larger quantity because it's closer to the right side of the board than negative 2 1/10. When we are asked to write our numbers from least to greatest, okay, again, what I like to do with my fractions is make them decimals, but we have 3/10, negative 3/8, negative 4/10, and then 1/3. So I made the fraction of negative 3/8 into negative 3.75, and I made the fraction of 1/3 into 0.3 repeating. And so what I then did is I wrote all of my decimal numbers down here so I can order them a little easier. Okay, so I have 3/10, negative 3.75, negative 0.4, and then negative 0.33. And I did that for a reason. The reason why I put negative 3.3, remember we can put 1 3, we can put many 3's, but because it's the 3 that keeps repeating. But when we're comparing numbers, especially with our 3/10 here, remember that there's a 0 after all the significant digits are done with a decimal. Well, if we think about money, which is 2 places after the decimal, this would be 0.30 or 30 cents, and this would be 0.33, which is 33 cents. So that's kind of to show us that the repeating 3 is a little bit bigger than the 3/10. So if we're listing these from least to greatest, negative 0.4, negative 4/10 would be the furthest to the left, and then negative 3/8 would be the next furthest to the left. And when we're converting these putting these in order, don't forget that we want to make sure that we go back to the original form. Then we have 3/10 would be next, and finally the largest number on here, as we said earlier, was 1/3. One note that I need to make with negative fractions. You might see the negative sign in front of the numerator. You might see the negative sign in front of the division bar. You might see the negative sign in front of the denominator. In each of those cases, these fractions mean all the same thing. The entire fraction is negative. It's not one portion of the fraction it's negative. The entire fraction is negative. So this is a negative 3/8, this is a negative 3/8, and this is a negative 3/8. Sometimes when we're asked to graph these numbers on the number line, okay, and on this number line I have it broken into tenths, so this is 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then 1 whole. And then on this side it's negative 1/10, 2/10, negative 2/10, negative 3/10, negative 4/10, negative 5/10, negative 6/10, negative 7/10, negative 8/10, negative 9/10, and then negative 1. Again, I converted my fractions to decimals, so we have negative 1/2, negative 4/10, negative 1/10, and then negative 3/5. So for my decimals, negative 1/2 is negative 0.5 or negative 5/10, and negative 3/5 becomes negative 6/10. So if I plot my numbers, negative 1/2 goes right there. It's because it's the 5th line in. And then negative 4/10 goes on the line before it. Negative 1/10 the line right after the 0. And then negative 6/10 is on the line right after the negative 1/2. So in order, put into descending order, we're going to start off with our biggest one first here. We're going to have negative 1/10. Then we're going to go negative 4/10, negative 1/2, and then negative 3/5. Okay, let's let you guys try some of these, comparing and putting these in order. Go ahead at this point and pause the video, and when you come back we'll see how you did. Okay, let's check how you did here. So with A, negative 5/10 is less than 3/4 because 3/4 is positive. All positive numbers are larger than negative numbers. For B, negative 8/10 is less than negative 11/100. Why is that? Because negative 11/100 is closer to 0. It's closer to our whole numbers than negative 8/10. Negative 2/3 is larger than negative 9/10. Okay? Because if you make this a decimal, this would be 0.6 repeating, which is closer to the whole numbers, positive whole numbers, than 0.9. That would be negative 0.9, I'm sorry. And then negative 1/8 is smaller than negative 0.12, or negative 12/100. That's because if you convert negative 1/8 into a decimal, it is negative 1.25. And then this would negative 0.12 or negative 12/100. Really what happens is because this is a 0 here, okay, this is a smaller number, excuse me, this is a larger number, and it is closer to 0 than negative 1.25. To arrange these numbers in descending order, remember we're going to put the numbers in descending, which is largest first. And I actually have this backwards. Look at that. Huh. So if we're going to do this in descending order, it would be 0.6, negative 2/5, negative 3/10, and negative 1 3/8. Huh. Okay, well, see, make mistakes all the time. It's a good thing we can correct them. So if you have any questions, feel free to go back and watch this video. If you have questions that aren't answered there, bring them to class, and I will see you there. Whoosh!